In warfare, both ancient and modern, the only constant is change. In antiquity, battle and even wars could be decided when one side learned to shoot arrows from horseback, or made their spears 2 meters longer, or stuffed a bunch of explosives and a cannonball into a big metal pipe and just hope for the best. But in the modern era, changes to warfare have a tendency to challenge the fundamental nature of war itself. A war is fought with guns and explosives? Well, not always. We've got nuclear weapons now. Are they fought on land and sea? Well, not always. A nation that controls the skies will generally control the battlefield itself. And are wars fought between combatants trading flesh and blood in exchange for victory? Well, not always, because the rise and evolution of drone-based warfare has meant that many global militaries can now wage war without putting their troops in harm's way. In today's special episode of War Graphics, we're going to take a close look at drone warfare, and specifically how it's changing. We're not talking about the America-dominated Reaper and Predator strikes of the 2010s either, but a gritty, cheap, and effective set of strategies and tactics that have changed the game on the modern battlefield and may already be changing the nature of war itself. Now, in order to understand just how quickly modern drone warfare is evolving, we've got to understand a really key point. Drones themselves are definitely not new. In fact, non-piloted aircraft have been around nearly as long as piloted ones, with the first drones, the British aerial target craft and the American Kettering bug aerial torpedo, both taking their first flights before the conclusion of World War I. After a limited use for training purposes in World War II, reconnaissance drones flew missions as early as Vietnam and even started launching missiles at ground targets during that same time. Several global nations have been manufacturing drones since the Cold War years, and in the 2000s and 2010s, they became well-tested weapons of war in the arsenal of the United States and NATO. But it's that long, quiet history of drone warfare that makes the revolution of the past few years all the more impressive. The difference maker that kicked off said revolution actually hasn't been an advancement in technology or the introduction of a new tactic. Instead, it's been a matter of cost and miniaturization. Drones first became available for commercial use in the United States in 2006 when federal regulations allowed the operation of unmanned aerial vehicles for non-military purposes, and while public and private sector organizations spent those early years trying to use drones for things like disaster relief and property monitoring, other companies set to work making drones available for the ordinary consumer. That was a long, slow process, and one that required both technological and regulatory advancements in most nations where consumer drone development was taking place. But by the late 2010s, early quadcopter drones, that is, drones with 4 helicopter-like propellers, were available on the market for just a couple of $1,000s. Since then, consumer drones have gotten both cheaper and more technologically sophisticated as critical technologies have been miniaturized and mass-produced. According to Statista, roughly 5 million consumer drones were shipped around the world in 2010, with over 7 million shipments per year expected by 2025. Today, a quick Amazon search offers drones that can fly for over an hour and transmit video across 10 kilometers or more for under $500 a piece, with simpler camera-equipped drones available for less than $50. These drones can, in turn, be heavily modified, with legions of knowledgeable people on Reddit, YouTube, and a range of other publicly available platforms who are more than willing to provide their technological insight. That insight would allow someone, hypothetically speaking, to attach a speaker to their drone so they can blast loud music outside the window of a neighbor who's pissed them off. It would allow them to attach a device to spray seeds all over their big fancy vegetable garden. It would allow them to attach a confetti cannon in advance of their 2021 throwback gender reveal party. But they also had the potential to be used for violent aims or even during wartime. The core issue here is a matter of cost. Take the F-16 Viper, an internationally available, very dangerous fighter aircraft that currently sits in the arsenal of well over a dozen global militaries. It can, of course, win air-to-air battles against other fighters, but it's a true multi-role aircraft able to perform reconnaissance, attack ground targets, and do a whole lot more. It costs around $30 million to acquire just a single recently built unit, at an additional cost per flight hour of about $27,000, and it has maintenance requirements that demand dedicated personnel and frequent parts replacement in order to keep them in the skies. On the spectrum of modern jet aircraft, the F-16 is still the affordable option. We'll look at past export controls on this one. The South Korean-made KAIT-50, the Sukhoi Su-27, the Saab Gripen, and the Chengdu J-10, other mass-produced advanced multi-role aircraft, run at a similar or higher cost. And we'll grant you, there are a lot of mission roles that do require fighter aircraft like this. Pro tip for our guerrilla army listeners out there, do not take your quadcopter into an air-to-air dogfight with a Raptor. It's not going to win. But some jobs performed by these advanced aircraft can be done by consumer drones, especially attacks against targets close to the front lines or in asymmetrical or guerrilla conflicts. And we're not just talking about some minor savings here either. For the price of a single new model F-16, you could purchase a full 60,000 high-quality quadcopters or more, each with a range of several kilometers, cameras, and a payload capacity that can go as high as a couple of kilograms. Strap a cheap detonator to a standard 1.25 pound or half-kilo block of C4 to a quadcopter, and, well, now you've got a bomb capable of blasting through reinforced doors or killing several enemy combatants if used correctly. And you don't just have one, you've got 60,000, and they are far more maneuverable with their low speed, far harder to detect, and completely and totally expendable. On global battlefields from Ukraine to Gaza to Myanmar, Sudan, and more, drones have been a game changer for smaller, underfunded, or cost-saving militaries, as well as for insurgencies, resistance groups, and even terror organizations. During large battles, drones can be used one by one, in small groups, or in massive wave attacks, coming from the air to explode at enemy positions or force a retreat. They can be controlled by cell phones or handheld remotes in the field. They can be transported easily, and they can launch ambushes or carry out harassing attacks against nearby enemy units and outposts, fortified positions, urban areas, or out in the field. They can overwhelm, outwit, or completely bypass anti-air defenses meant to catch proper guided missiles, and they can be used improvisationally in the heat of the moment with no need to utilize a remote operator in the sort of drone control bases that, for example, the US is known for. They can be used by small squads with minimal training, and depending on how they're set up, they can even be reused, dropping grenades or other payloads before making a quick escape. And they can be a lot more than just improvised missiles and bombs. In recent years, they've proven to be invaluable for reconnaissance purposes on the front lines, especially in wars marked by high numbers of small skirmishes instead of less frequent large battles. In that sort of environment, a small unit who can see an enemy force coming from, say, 2 kilometers away instead of 500 meters is at a massive advantage, able to set up ambushes, plan attacks, or get out of the area before they're ever located. Consumer drones have been used in sabotage attacks, blowing themselves up next to ammunition depots, power infrastructure, supply stores, or other key targets. And they can even be used for assassination, creeping quietly toward a specific target in the dead of the night, even when such an attack would require sneaking into an enemy encampment or navigating a hostile city. Perhaps, best of all, they can be easily crowdfunded, meaning that any nation or organization with popular support somewhere in the world can procure drones in large numbers without having to go through a foreign military. These consumer drones have been absolutely critical on the battlefields of Ukraine, where they're routinely handed out to units as small as 3 to 5 troops, as well as much bigger forces. Ukrainian drone operators are among that military's most valuable resource, and they're being trained more and more by the day. Now, drones essentially live stream a real-time view of the battlefield for both Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, helping them to understand and work effectively in their immediate combat radius. That knowledge, in turn, can be passed back to command centers, allowing for more effective real-time battlefield analysis and rapid response than the world has ever seen. Ukrainian drones guide artillery to fire on the right targets. They launch swarm attacks and harass Russian troops deep in the back lines. And they've been coming to Ukraine at a rate of 5 to 10,000 every month. In Israel, on the attacks of October 7, 2023, Hamas used a large wave of drones in a combined attack alongside rockets and ground forces, with their drones being used as the primary instrument to attack Israeli watchtowers, gun emplacements, and surveillance equipment. In Myanmar, rebel organizations have begun using drones for their own bombing attacks, and while in Yemen, drone technology used by the Houthi rebel organization actually gets pretty advanced, the group has also used consumer drones in their own offensives as a supplement. Even the Islamic State was an early adopter of quadcopters, using them to great effect during the siege of Mosul in 2017. Responding to the new wartime demand, a wide range of companies have started to take up the call and produce better drones that are better optimized for warfighting. In Ukraine alone, over 200 startup companies are currently working to produce expendable, cheap drones that they're constantly updating, relying on software and limited production runs of a given drone iteration to stay versatile and rapidly evolve. Around the world, private companies have started to get in on the action, while major militaries have been forced to weigh the advantages of trying to do their own work in-house. But if a military is going to field its own small drones with any level of success at all, it'll have to completely give up on the years-long development processes that most weapons and equipment go through and adapt to focus on low-cost, high-output production and highly adaptable, easily modified platforms. Whether the militaries of the world can succeed or whether they'll simply throw up their hands and leave it to the private sector, we'll have to wait and see. But the growing world of drone warfare goes far beyond the sort of things you'd find on the shelves at Walmart. Over 30 global nations are known or believed to have armed drones in their arsenal in late 2024, including not just global powerhouses like the US or China, but everybody from Kazakhstan to Poland to Egypt to Indonesia to Nigeria and more. Many of those countries have acquired their drones from other militaries, but others have built their own robust arsenals, either with parts sourced abroad or completely indigenously. Over 10 of them have actually conducted drone strikes, including Azerbaijan, the UAE, and Iraq, countries that, by and large, a person watching worldwide news wouldn't have associated with drone strikes in the first place. When analyzing what a given country has in its arsenal, there are 3 basic factors to consider: the drone's intended altitude, its endurance, and whether or not it's armed. For example, a high-altitude, high-endurance, unarmed drone is probably going to be used for some sort of strategic reconnaissance, say by India scoping out Pakistan or China running patrols above the South China Sea. Low-altitude, low-endurance drones are probably going to be running short missions to active crisis zones, and they're probably going to be armed. They might also be cheaper or more expendable. Finally, low-altitude, high-endurance drones are probably going to show up in the arsenals of nations that need to project some sort of power, flying for very long distances to strike targets abroad, say the United States sending drones from the Indian Ocean to strike Afghanistan. On the list of global drone exporters, Israel deserves special mention here. Between 2001 and 2011, Israel was responsible for nearly half of all military drone sales, and by proportion, they're still among the largest exporter today. They've supplied drones to the EU, Australia, and nations in Africa and Asia. China too is picking up steam with its domestically produced drones, including its CH series, which serves buyers from Ethiopia to Serbia to Zambia and the Congo. Different drones within the CH series serve a variety of different mission roles. But some, like the widely used CH-4, have in-air endurance of over a day and a half and can fire air-to-ground missiles at altitudes that would put them outside the range of most surface-to-air missiles. Finally, the United States has exported drones to 55 countries around the world, including just about every NATO country and a range of allies and frenemies around the world. But when it comes to drones that have changed the battlefield, and now we're talking about proper military drones rather than commercial stuff, the difference-making factor is, yet again, not a matter of better performance or new capabilities. Instead, it's a matter of cost. And when we're talking about low-cost, high-effectiveness drone technologies, 2 countries absolutely lead the pack. It's Turkey and Iran. We'll start with Turkey, whose Bayraktar line of drones has made a major difference for beleaguered countries in war zones around the world. The flagship of the Bayraktar line, so to speak, is the Bayraktar TB2, a 6.5 meter long, 12 meter wingspan drone with a top speed of just 222 kilometers an hour and endurance of just about a day at an altitude of above 5,000 meters. With those numbers, it fits neatly into the category of a medium-altitude, long-endurance, or MALE drone, and it's got the capacity to carry smart bombs, anti-tank missiles, laser-guided rockets, and more on its 4 hardpoints. Now, it's hard to get an exact figure on the drone's price, but it appears that a single drone costs approximately $5 million, which, when comparing its ability to that price tag, is a very, very good deal. The aircraft's low speed gives it a low radar cross-section, and with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of flight hours logged between its various operators, it's proven to be highly dependable and very effective in combat. But the Bayraktar line aren't just effective, relatively cheap drones, they also proliferate like mad. And with at least 600 models of the TB2 in operation globally, they found their way into the hands of a whole lot of global operators. For example, they've played a major role in the Second Libyan Civil War, in the arsenal of the internationally recognized Libyan government. They've shot down massive cargo planes, destroyed bases and troop columns under the command of warlord Khalifa Haftar, and have helped turn Haftar's major 2019 offensive into a stalemate. In Azerbaijan, they've destroyed artillery and tanks during the Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020, while in Ethiopia they've been used by the government, including in attacks that have killed dozens of civilians. In Africa, the drones are widely used in fighting back against Islamist militants in the Sahel, where nations very much appreciate the opportunity to work with more lenient Turkey rather than conforming to geopolitical or humanitarian expectations with US or EU providers. They've also played a critical role in the early months of Ukraine's defense against Russia in 2022, and it quickly became a morale-boosting symbol of resistance at that time. TB2s also streamed into Ukraine from international benefactors around the world, and while their effectiveness has been blunted by Russia's improving air defenses, there's hope that the arrival of F-16s and other vital air equipment will get Ukraine's remaining TB2s out of their hangars again. Then there's Iran, where it's the Shahed series of drones that have seen international use and gained international notoriety. There are a few drones in the Shahed family that warrant attention, so we'll run through a few of them here. The Shahed 129 is basically a knockoff of the American MQ-1 Predator drone, capable of flight for a full day and generally regarded as being quite a potent weapon. The 129 has seen action in the Syrian civil war, and they've been provided to the Hezbollah organization in Lebanon, while Russia has acquired several dozen to carry out strikes over Ukraine. In Iran, they're seen as the backbone of future large-scale drone operations, and Iran's current fleet size is unknown. The Sagak, or Thunderbolt series, is a flying wing design believed to be used for reconnaissance operations, which have caught the attention of Russia and shown up in the skies over Israel. Finally, the Shahed 238 is a newer drone whose capabilities aren't fully known yet, but which is a turbojet-powered drone meant to drop munitions on targets below. But it's the Shahed 136 that's gotten the most attention thus far, with a low build cost somewhere between $10,000 and $55,000 per unit, and an unknown number have been made at this time. The Shahed 136 is a suicide drone that uses a pusher-prop engine and a narrow delta wing to drive it forward at a minimum speed of 185 km per hour. It weighs about 200 kilograms and can fly as far as 2,500 kilometers, and it carries a 50-kilogram warhead capable of causing immense destruction on the ground. Because of their inexpensive cost and ease of production, they're a favorite of the Houthi rebels in Yemen, Iran's proxy forces in Syria, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps during their attacks on Iraqi Kurdistan. Most importantly of all, though, is the Shahed 136 is used by Russia, first with the Iran-made version and then with a Russian-made model called the Garan 2. The Garan 2 is made of fiberglass and carbon fiber and uses Russian internal systems and munitions. Russia has used hundreds of the drones against Ukraine, including in wave attacks that have seen dozens deployed at the same time against the Ukrainian power grid in the capital city of Kyiv. Because of their slow speed, low flying altitude, and small size, they're very difficult to capture on the radar on board Ukrainian planes, and Ukraine has had to go to great lengths to find interceptor systems that can deal with these particular drones. The best solution so far seems to be shooting the living daylights out of them with Soviet-era machine guns. And although we've thus far talked about inexpensive drones being the real game changer in modern battles, there's one advancement that we've got to discuss that has come on the technological side. That would be the goal of developing a so-called loyal wingman, which is an integral part to the United States' plan to introduce a 6th-generation fighter jet, upgrade its bomber fleet to the B-21 Raider, and further modernize its current fleet of F-35 Lightning aircraft. The basic concept here is that when next-generation fighters take to the sky, they're not going to be alone. Instead, they're going to be accompanied by 2 autonomous wingman drones who can fly just as fast, just as far, and just as stealthily as the planes they're attached to. With these loyal wingmen, the US military hopes that it can more than triple the firepower of its current fighter aircraft, which can leverage the drone's own internal bays as well as their own to carry missiles, bombs, and other munitions while remaining stealthy. As of right now, the United States plans to acquire 1,000, pairing 2 drones to each 200 next-generation fighters and 300 F-35s. While it's unlikely that the drones will currently be able to keep up in a dogfight, that's probably on the United States' mind for way down the road, and in the meantime, they can open up tactics that would be unthinkable with human pilots, running highly risky missions or even throwing themselves in front of incoming enemy missiles as a last resort. But with all these advancements in consumer drone technology, in affordable military drones, and next-generation loyal wingmen, we're still not done, because we haven't touched on the drones that aren't intended to fly. Now let's talk about the Sea Drone, which before 2022 was a concept mostly reserved for either remotely operated exploration or maintenance craft, say checking on the sea floor, or inspecting undersea pipelines, or for military operations like mine clearing that took place away from active combat zones. But they've taken on a much more active role in hostilities in and around the Black Sea, beginning around the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. These drones mostly consist of a low-lying hull, a top-mounted camera, an enclosed compartment packed with explosives, and a detonator. And not exactly the sort of boat that a person would be comfortable riding on, but seeing as their intended purpose is to get as close to the hulls of enemy ships as possible and then explode, you probably shouldn't ride on them anyway. These drones are able to beam back images to their handlers on land and to program to putter their way out to a target slowly on their own before being taken over by remote operators and beginning a mad dash forward to hit or whatever they're trying to hit. Sitting so low that they're practically underwater, too small to leave much of a wake, and painted black to blend in with the dead of night, these naval drones were both a massive surprise to Russian forces and very hard to deal with even after they became a constant presence in the Black Sea. They're relatively cheap to produce, with estimated costs around $250,000 a piece, and they're easily crowdfunded and built with off-the-shelf parts, or off-the-shelf parts minus the high explosives. They're especially dangerous in swarm attacks, overwhelming the limited numbers of anti-boarding guns carried on most Russian naval ships, and they've been involved in several major attacks on Russian naval targets. They've effectively deterred Russia from parts of the Black Sea and forced operational changes in how Russia handles itself. Of course, Russia has attempted to build its own sea drones, and the nation has had success of its own in that regard. But as of now, they are a decisively Ukrainian thing. But they might not stay strictly Ukrainian for long. While international experts widely agree that sea drone technology is, for now, mostly experimental, their clear effectiveness has caught the attention of global militaries and opened up the potential for an arms race that nobody saw coming. It's one of those massive blind spots that in hindsight seems practically unmissable, but we've got to emphasize that relatively low-tech, unsophisticated sea drones have been the last thing on the minds of most navies around the world. That includes what they were thinking about when designing new and very expensive vessels, which now major navies like the US, the UK, or China will have to think about very differently. After all, if they can be sunk by the grown-up version of the remote-controlled speedboat a 4-year-old can play with at bath time, then it's going to be a bit of a problem, isn't it? Assuming that Ukraine, in some form, remains a sovereign nation by the end of its war with Russia, it's likely to find itself becoming a global leader in maritime drone technology. Its first-generation attack drones are still very much in use, but so are an expanded arsenal that seems to be growing by the day. Weaponized jet skis are now part of the Ukrainian arsenal, as are a number of suicide boats that are designed to either be more maneuverable, capable of dodging anti-drone fire from ships, or carry heavier munitions that can punch through some seriously reinforced hulls. Ukraine is also developing submersible explosive drones. Again, some that go fast and make little explosions, and some that go slow and explode very big. So too will Ukrainian military veterans be in demand, because as of now, they're the only people on planet Earth with experience using naval attack drones at large scale, and their expertise will be very important for countries looking to get in on the game. And in addition to drones, both air and sea, we've got to talk about UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. Defined in a general sense as anything that's got wheels and can blow up, UGVs can take many different forms, from heavily armored tank-like vehicles to fast-moving, quickly deployed drones to things that can scurry around like a mouse. They're already well developed in the non-military sphere. UGVs are used in search and rescue, firefighting, nuclear response, mining, manufacturing, agriculture, and a whole lot more. However, they've been largely ignored as an offensive military tool, instead being developed for explosives disposal, search and rescue, or defensive or limited offensive guard robots. But in recent years, offensive UGVs have captured increasing attention from global militaries and arms manufacturers. Take, for example, the Type X, which was revealed to the public in 2020 by Estonian robotics firm Milrem. Outwardly, the Type X looks like a tank, which it basically is. It's got the ability to use high-caliber autocannons, mortars, surface-to-air missiles, and more, putting it not quite on the level of a manned heavy tank, but significantly above most infantry fighting vehicles. There's also the Ripsaw series, produced by American firm How and How Technologies, which has had trouble catching an order from the US military for decades, but has recently put out a very impressive latest iteration of their drone tank. Fully autonomous, all-electric, and armed with a Bushmaster 2 chain gun and 2 anti-tank guided missiles, the Ripsaw M5 is currently undergoing experimental testing with the US Army. The Ripsaw, by the way, is being designed so that it can be controlled from a modified US Army manned vehicle, making it an on-the-ground iteration of the Law Wingman concept that the US wants to use in the air. The Type X, the Ripsaw, and a variety of other experimental tank-like UGVs are edging their way toward an eventual production line, setting up a future in which mechanized armies can send their heavy armor into harm's way without putting their troops' lives at risk. But yet again, it's not just bigger and better drones that have the potential to make the difference when it comes to land-based combat. A few world nations have turned toward at least a tentative exploration of technologies that could allow older tanks, trucks, Humvees, and even smaller vehicles to be turned into autonomous or remote-operated drones, taking advantage of large amounts of outdated surplus for the same kind of kamikaze drone attacks that we've seen in the air and on the seas. Yet again, that sort of merger between old-school hardware and advanced technology could potentially create beasts that can sow carnage among the enemy at minimal cost to one's own side. For example, take the 5th-generation Toyota Hilux, which has been the stuff of legend for global insurgencies, militias, and land-holding terror organizations for the better part of 5 decades. There are several million 5th-generation Hiluxes alone spread across the world, and that doesn't even account for the older models that defined, for instance, the very real Toyota war fought between Chad and Libya in the 80s. Nobody's really looking to drive the ones that haven't been scrapped, but you can sure as pack them full of explosives and remotely drive them at a reinforced target, probably with some serious success. Replicate that with other abundant but outdated vehicles, or with military jeeps and trucks, or even old tanks that are due to be phased out of service and scrapped, and we're now talking about a potential weapon that every nation with a military could eventually work out. As might already be clear, evolutions in drone-based warfighting seem to be headed down 2 simultaneous but rather diverging paths. One is all about technological advancement, figuring out how to make bigger, more sophisticated, more capable, or more heavily armed drones that can augment or replace the cutting-edge manned technology that's already in the field. The other is far more utilitarian. How do you build the highest possible number of autonomous vehicles for the least amount of money that can both enable the best possible level of battlefield success and sacrifice the lowest possible number of troops in the process? When it comes to the utilitarian side of things, it appears as if miniaturization, assembly line readiness, and indigenous production are going to be the things that matter. Drones that don't have to be big, clunky, or sophisticated might be somewhat less impressive for a video over on our sister channel Mega Projects, but the point isn't to impress onlookers. A drone that's just a meter across, but can fly fast, low, and quiet for 100 kilometers before attacking a target would be a major advancement in its own right. So would a flying wing drone that's light enough to toss into the air with your hands, but can stay aloft for weeks and beam images back to its handlers on the ground. A cheap small drone that can deliver a chemical weapon or a nuclear one suddenly has the potential to do all the work of a B-2 bomber or a Dreadnought-class submarine for a tiny fraction of the cost. And drones that can be produced using parts expertise and infrastructure sourced from home rather than abroad gives both nations and non-state actors the ability to choose their own destiny and gain air power without having to rely on more powerful backers. On the side of technological advancement, the next few decades are likely going to be about seeing where all of the new AI, machine learning, and other emerging technology can do when it's allowed to flex its muscles. Beyond the difficult ethical arguments about allowing killer robots to take human lives, there's also the open question of just how advanced drone technology can really get. Is it possible that future warfare could see autonomous tanks take over grassy battlefields, or whole drone battleships that can coordinate every weapon and system function in perfect synchronicity? And what does that mean for the world when one or a few nations can put those weapons into the field, completely insulating their troops from harm, but everybody else can't? Whatever humanity's eventual course, one thing's absolutely certain: drone technology isn't just here to stay, it's here to take over. And as it does, it's going to fundamentally change the way that war works. This thing we refer to as modern warfare is modern only until the next technological revolution comes along, wiping away the weapons and war machines that were given to us by the last technological revolution. The cycle will continue as it always continues, and where it takes us, well, we're not going to know until it arrives.